Magecraft is a key part of Runeterra's world. I mean, the name of the planet basically means Magic Earth at the end of the day. While the storyline of Arcane might have you believe otherwise, magic is common as dirt in League's world. The planet itself was created by relics inscribed with powerful primal runes. And just about every living thing on Runeterra has magical energy infused into its very essence, even if some wrongfully assume otherwise. That said, magic can take many, and I mean many different forms. With a roster of well over 100 characters, it's not surprising that so many champions would all have fairly varied and diverse abilities, even if some of them have similar or even near identical powers in theory. In fact, while you could see the latter as simply an inevitability of adding so many characters to the game over time, I think it also adds potential for deeper world building, even if unintentionally. In a previous video, I theorized that the souls in Runeterra are the manifestations of someone's identity. They are the very idea of a person given form, including all of that individual's thoughts, beliefs, memories, and so on. By that same metric, though, I believe that how magic manifests in an individual and how they wield said magic can also be seen as a representation of their character. For example, let's take a look at two well-known fire mages. Annie is about what you would expect when you typically envision the concept. She wields her flames primarily as a destructive force that burns everything around her to ash. Annie is, fittingly enough, often portrayed as a pyromaniac who genuinely enjoys watching things being reduced to cinders. Her personality might also be slightly influenced by the flame demon living inside her, but either way, Annie's fire magic is primarily a force for chaos and destruction. Now, compare Annie to Milio, a young fire mage from Ishtal who wields his power in very much the opposite way. While Milio can use his magic offensively, he does so in small bursts rather than letting it turn into a raging inferno. His primary use of fire magic, though, is using it to heal, shield, or even empower others. Indeed, Milio's flame is often likened to a campfire or a lit hearth, something to soothe your woes and keep you warm. Milio can even manifest little familiars called flamigos that act as living embodiments of this concept. Annie and Milio both draw strength from the same element, but something as simple as their perspectives can radically change how that element is manifested. Milio, in particular, even displays that one's mindset may be an even more important factor than we initially thought. Like, fire can't normally create barriers or restore vitality. Objectively speaking, it is a destructive force that burns everything in its path until there's nothing left to use as fuel. However, we humans have learned to harness and cultivate it, giving the power of flame potential beyond its natural purpose. Milio embodies that through his cheerful outlook, and, most importantly, how he manifests his magic. But now let's take a look at a power set on the opposite end of the spectrum, ice magic. Now, ice magic is something that quite a few characters in League's mythos have access to. In the Freljord, natural-born ice mages are just called iceborn. For most, this really just means that they can freely interact with true ice, a sort of magically infused ice that almost never melts and is harder than steel. True ice is typically fashioned into weapons for iceborn to wield, and anyone who doesn't have an affinity for ice magic tends to get instant frostbite even when touching the stuff. That said, even the vast majority of iceborn don't actually learn how to wield their element beyond just touching and using true ice. However, there are two characters we know of who wield ice in a much purer form, Lysandra and Nunu. The former is just straight up called the Ice Witch, who uses her innate talent to conjure and control true ice on a level far beyond just affixing it to weapons. That said, Lysandra's true ice takes on a more sinister appearance, becoming what some refer to as black ice. This is largely due to her connections with the Void, whose presence has a tendency to corrupt anything that it comes into contact with. Lysandra is something of an anti-villain in League's mythos. While she is making an effort to keep the Void at bay, the Ice Witch has a somewhat nihilistic view on the matter. She truly believes that actually defeating the Watchers, the eldritch entities residing within the Void, is an impossibility. The best she can do is prolong Runeterra's destruction at their hands for as long as possible. Lysandra has made it her sole mission to keep the Watchers trapped inside a massive barrier of true ice, even though it's come at a great cost to both herself and the Freljord as a whole. Also, that barrier is slowly breaking down, and it will not last for much longer. Never mind that in the literal millennia that she's been doing this, Lysandra has never once bothered to actually look for a means of truly defeating the Void. She's never even been outside the Freljord to our knowledge. If she had been, she might have learned about celestial magic and how effective that is, but whatever. Despite having a whole cult at her disposal, Lysandra is a largely isolated character. She doesn't truly trust anyone or anything but herself, keeping even the true nature of her mission largely secret from her followers. This is the woman who sacrificed her own sisters in the ritual that made the true ice barrier, after all. Because of this, it's easy to see how Lysandra's manifestation of black ice is reflective of her character. Harsh, rigid, and lonely. Hell, Lysandra's ult in-game even allowed her to encase herself in a tomb of black ice, a nigh-invincible barrier that cuts her off from the rest of the world. It's inflexible, much like her own nihilistic worldview. By contrast, Nunu and his Yeti companion Willem wield ice magic in a wildly different manner. The Song of Nunu game reveals to us that their power comes partially from the blessing of Anivia, Freljord's local ice deity, but the way it manifests is something entirely unique to this duo. In truth, it might be more apt to call their power snow magic. Unlike Lysandra's power, which is hard and rigid, what Nunu and Willem have is soft and malleable. Snow can be molded into a variety of shapes, embodying vast possibilities that come from just a bit of imagination. While it can be used to do things like conjure small blizzards, Nunu and Willem mostly use their powers to create snowballs or even summon whimsical figures. Lysandra believes that Runeterra is doomed to be consumed by the Void, and the only option is to stall for time as long as she can. Her outlook on life is rather bleak and hopeless. Nunu and Willem understand the value of clinging to hope and seeking other better options than just accepting the grim reality of what's immediately apparent. So, alright, it's easy enough to look at the elemental mages and interpret how their techniques are symbolic to their personalities. But what about mages who rely on other sources of power? There are quite a few champions that wield soul magic in some way, shape, or form. Probably too many to really address all of them in this video. So instead, let's take a look at a couple of the more notable examples. Viego is the source of the Black Mist. It pours from the wound in his chest to encompass whole landmasses all at once. Now, canonically, the Black Mist is a weird mix of a few different magics interacting, because the Shadow Isle storyline is needlessly convoluted, but what's more important here is what the Black Mist actually represents from a narrative perspective. Viego is, at his core, a man driven by grief. In fact, you could argue that's all that really remains of him. This is the guy who was ready and willing to raise hell, literally, to revive his deceased queen. And for all intents and purposes, he effectively did. The Black Mist twists and perverts the souls of the deceased, reviving them as little more than horrid reflections of who or what they once were. But notably, those who were already kinda scumbags before being turned tend to remain a bit more of themselves than the mindless wraiths that stalk the Shadow Isles. I've said in the past that the Black Mist at its core represents negative emotion. Anger, despair, hatred, misery, all the things Viego felt after losing his soul. It's little wonder, then, that those it resurrects are brought back as these twisted shades of themselves. Viego can even enforce his own will onto the living with the Black Mist, mind-controlling them through a process called ruination. Now, it hardly needs to be said how horribly this premise was butchered in the Rise of the Sentinels event, but it does at least serve a solid concept. Viego preys on the doubts and insecurities of others to turn them into his thralls. Not only does this perfectly reflect the Ruined King's own mental state, but it also serves as a warped manifestation of his authority as a king, a manifestation of the entitlement Viego feels from his royal blood, even if he was never actually meant to inherit the throne. By stark contrast to Viego, we have Karma, whose magic manifests a purer form of soul energy that relies on a calm mind and an open heart. As she possesses the spirits of all prior karmas within her, you could view it as a form of magic similar to necromancy. But that just goes to show that not even spellcraft which involves defying death is inherently good or evil. Karma's power can be destructive, if she allows it to be, but it's by and large used to protect or restrain. In other words, a far more pacifistic approach. What's more, this magic allows Karma to commune with and gain insight from all of her past lives. She lives at peace with the spirits inside her, as opposed to Viego, who just enslaves the souls his black mist touches. Let's just ignore that ruined Karma ever happened, shall we? I could go on, as there are many examples to draw from, but I think the point is clear. If magic is theoretically capable of anything in the world of Runeterra, then its limits ultimately depend on the user. How different champions wield the arcane and the ways it can manifest under them can be a fascinating lens with which to view their characters. The Netflix series may insist that magic in Runeterra is inherently dangerous, corrupting, and unpredictable, but in the broader context of League's lore, it's just another tool for storytelling, particularly personalized storytelling.